And so about at mile 275, so only 25 miles from the finish line, I realized, I didn't hit the limit, that physical and emotional limit. And it started to kind of, waking me up. It's like, maybe those limits are further out than we think they are. And maybe we're putting limits in our head that are holding us back. Little problems are hard to see, but easy to fix. Big problems are easy to see, but hard to fix. Yeah, so the epic performance, kind of where that came from, those are 5 pillars. So the E in epic, stands for envision. How do you envision the big things in life and at work that you want to accomplish? P is, how do you put a plan in place in order to accomplish those things? I is, how do you iterate toward accomplishing that? C is, how do you collaborate? Right, and the last is, you have to go out and perform it. So that's the epic performance.
How many of us have learned, actually truly know the limits to our potential? For some, they can say they know it, while for others, we've yet to discover that. And the thing is, we tend to play it safe for the most part, don't we? So let's face it, if there isn't a need to challenge ourselves, why are we going to do that? But here's the kicker. When we think back on the times when we've persevered and we've actually pushed ourselves to achieve something that we thought that was either going to be too difficult or impossible, we discovered that we are made of much more than we had ever imagined. Well, today we're going to dive into peak performance and what that looks like, feels like, and sounds like. Now, before I get into all that, I just want to say to have you reminded to hit like, subscribe, and share on your favorite platform so you can stay updated on the latest content, as well as helping me spread the Awakened Man message. And for that, I just want to say I'm truly grateful. So let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
So welcome to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. So do you know what your peak performance actually looks like? And when was the last time that you challenged yourself to that higher level? Listen, I really recognize that we're all wired differently, and to some extent, but I believe that deep down we have the same drive, this drive or calling to find out what we are made of. And for some of us, when fear will step in the way. And while for others, they hear that fear calling, but they choose to ignore it and press on. Well, today my guest is one of those latter guys, and he's going to share how he shifted from working in Silicon Valley to starting his own organization and becoming an ultra marathon athlete. So let me introduce Bryan Gillette. Bryan, for more than 25 years, Bryan has been had senior roles in human resources, leadership development, and communications for companies of all sizes, leading teams of hundreds of people and managing multi-million-dollar budgets. He's also the founder of the Summiting Group, I should say, a consulting firm that helps leaders and teams reach their peak performance. Now, Bryan knows a little bit about peak performance, as he's also an endurance athlete, as I had just alluded to, and he's actually completed a 300-mile bike ride in one day. Now, that's not a motorbike, that's one with pedals. So I'm so excited to get on with this interview and let us get started. So welcome to the show, Bryan. How are things today?
Alan, thanks for having me on the show. Things are going well here. So it's nice to be talking to you.
Yeah, excellent. I was so impressed when I was reading your information and getting ready for today that you've just done so many things. And so one of the things that we talk about in the Awakened Man program is we always talk about each one of us is on our own hero's quest or our hero's journey. And it's really a transformation journey. And so the opening question I have for you is to tell us a little about your journey and how that has paved the way to who you are today and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, I love that question about kind of the journey, how we got to where we are. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm still here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Both my parents have been married for over 50 years. Nice. They were great role models for me and kind of as what it means to have a good relationship, but also for what it means to be parents. So I have 2 boys. two teenage boys, so those can be that can be challenging at times. But I often will think back about, okay, how do my parents handle situations? And when I handle a situation that is not necessarily the right way, I think, okay, they wouldn't have handled it that way. So I had a kind of a very abnormal childhood. Is, I had two parents at home. Or I should say two parents, that were married for a long time, which it's a little bit abnormal in today's. And so live in the San Francisco Bay Area, just love it here. And about 10 years ago this month, my wife and I had been to about a dozen funerals in the 5 years preceding that. And I was working in the corporate world, and I realized, at the time my kids were 3 and 5, I realized, life is pretty short. And my parents, I don't know how long they're going to be around. They're in their 80s now, but I want to make sure that I spend time. I know who my kids are. And so that's when I thought, we had the means. I'm going to kind of semi-retire, but still have my own consulting practice because I love the work, but be able to work from home. My dad worked from home, so I could often go down into his office and just chat with him for a few moments. So, 10 years ago, I did that. I have never regretted it because I've been able to see my kids grow up. So that's a little bit about the journey, and kind of, I'm sure we can talk about a lot of the stuff that's there.
Yeah, that is so great. And what a great, way to start to talk about that, because how often is it that we are raised in not that type of environment, right? And you were able to take those lessons. And even if we didn't have the two-parent role model that you had, we still have the opportunity to look back and learn from what they taught us and weren't able to teach us, because there's always lots of learning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to spend a little bit of, as I said in the introduction, you're an ultra marathoner, an ultra athlete. And I also want to talk a little bit about your book, but let's start off with the athletic side of you. Now, I read somewhere that you read 8 marathons back to back. How hard is it to do something like that?
It's hard. I won't sugarcoat it, Alan. It is hard. People often ask, okay, what's the hardest part about running 8 marathons? So it's 200 miles, 205 miles to be exact. And it's around one of these just pristine lakes, Lake Tahoe, which borders California. Many of your readers or your listeners may know about it. Borders California and Nevada. If you just go around the border of the lake, it's 72 miles around. But we are up at elevation anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 feet. And we're kind of well away from the border of it. So it's a 200 mile loop around it. When people ask what's the hardest part, and for me, the hardest part was getting to the start line, because you spend a year of really dedicated training and working hard and getting up at 3 a.m. to go for a run. And so that's a year of it. But when you get to the start line, it's 100 hours to get from the start line to the finish line if you're going to use the full time. For me, it was 76 hours. So it's hard. There's no doubt about it. But one of the things that I've learned in the intro, you talked about the 300-mile bike ride. Is that when I did that 300-mile bike ride, it was the first time I had gone through the night without any sleep. So 24 hours on the bike. And my reason for doing it is I wanted to understand, where's that limit we have in ourselves? Where's that limit physically and mentally? I mean, any of these types of endurance events, they're mental. You got to be in great physical shape. There's no doubt about it, but it's up in the head that really makes a difference. And, I had seen, in that, somewhere around mile 125, I had seen somebody die dead on the side of the road. And then later on, or earlier in the day, I should say, I collided with another bicycle that I needed to get a new wheel. And so that kind of shook me up. Sure. But it's like, I'm gonna keep going. And so about at mile 275, so only 25 miles from the finish line, I realized, I didn't hit the limit, that physical and emotional limit. And it started to kind of, waking me up. It's like, maybe maybe those limits are further out than we think they are. And maybe we're putting limits in our head that are holding us back.
Mm.
And that's kind of where it really started to kind of get me thinking about, all right, maybe we can push a little bit further. And that became the basis, or kind of the foundation for the book that I eventually wrote.
Wow, that's incredible. And just, those two experiences alone would normally, I would suggest, probably throw anyone, and yet you were able to persevere and go through it. So what were the, in the preparation for these two incredible, feats that you were after, what kind of mental preparation did you do? Is there an exercise or something? Like, I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, how do you prepare yourself? Did you just not go to sleep for 3 days just to see if you could, stay awake? Just what were you doing?
There is that visualization. I'm sure you've heard about visualizing kind of what does the end look like. And I will tell you, I visualized what it would look like when I crossed the finish line of the 200 miles. I mean, I knew, I'd probably be moving slow. And I just visualized my hands were in the air, and my wife was going to be there where she could give me a big hug. But
Yeah.
I ran that through over and over in my head. So by the time I actually crossed the finish line, I had done it in my head hundreds of times. And so it's that ability to see what success looks like. And I was working with one woman a while back, and she wanted to pass a law exam. And she'd failed it, I think, 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to her about it, and she knew what failure looked like. And I said, how do we envision what success looks like? And, imagine yourself walking into that test. Imagine yourself feeling confident. Imagine yourself taking those questions and seeing that first question and go, oh yeah, that's easy, and marking it off. Imagine just doing that throughout. And at the end of the test, imagine what it's like to turn it in feeling, I nailed this. And then a couple of weeks later, you get it in the mail and it says, congratulations, you passed. So we got to be able to see success to replicate it. And so that was, that's one thing. But, to kind of the other part of your question is, you just got to go out and do the hard work. You got to get up at 3 a.m. when it's raining and know that, okay, I've got to run a marathon today before 8 a.m. because I'm going to go, to my kid's soccer game, at 9. And so just doing that mental toughness over and over, and getting up at 3 a.m. and knowing it's raining, and then doing that the next day and the next day, that prepares you. So when you do have some hard times, at anything, whether it's on a race or, a run or a bike ride or in life, that, all right, I've been through these challenges before. I can get through it.
Yeah, that is so powerful. Love how you explain that. Really, it's about building that mindset to overcome the challenges. And that was kind of where I was leading to, or wanted to go to the next question. Is so you've figured out the plan that you need, the physical plan, the endurance plan to make it. And then I was, kind of also wondering, like, how did you also plan for like contingency plans if something, if a tire blew or something happened, in the run, are those types of things that also go into these long endurance races, or is that just something that, you deal with as it comes along?
Yeah, clearly they are. Most of the challenges on any endurance race, and even when I've done projects, on the corporate side, you should have a good sense of what most of the problems you're going to experience are. And so this is what training is all about. Or, we'll talk about iterate. It's kind of, doing things small and building up. That when you run 200 miles or 26.2 miles or, whatever it is, you're gonna have sore feet. You're gonna get blisters. So what can you do to try to avoid those blisters from happening? And then when they start to happen, what do you do to prevent them from getting worse? One of the quotes I often like to, say is, little problems are hard to see, but easy to fix. Big problems are easy to see, but hard to fix. So how do you identify those small problems early on and then fix them before they get to be big problems. The most, when I did the 200-mile run, I had a good sense of what the big issues were going to be. I was going to be tired, just lack of sleep. If I had problems with my food, because when you're eating every 45 minutes for 76 hours, you get tired of eating the same stuff. And your body will tell you when it's done. And so, at some point, I'm probably going to throw everything up. And then your stomach is empty and you can't move on an empty stomach. So how do you get some quick stuff in your stomach and then start to work on some longer things, like a peanut butter that's got a lot of fat that can move you.
Right.
So most of the problems I experienced, I was ready for. There was one that hit me completely out of the blue. About 4 days before the race, my wife got a diagnosis that she could have cancer.
Oh,
I mean, she'd gone in for her mammogram. The results came back, about 4 days before, and it said, "Hey, we see something. We'd like you to come in again and take another test." And that was not anywhere part of the training plan. I can plan a lot of problems, or look at a lot of problems. That was not one. And we talked about, do we continue the race? Do we not? Because whenever you do something like this, it's not a one person job. You need a spouse that is so supportive. And so 2 days before the race, we went in for another test, and they said it's probably, so that was on a Wednesday. And as we were driving up to Tahoe for the race, that started on Friday, and they said, we probably won't know the results until Monday or Tuesday the following week. So I was leaving for this race. I was going out in the wilderness, not knowing what was going to happen. And so, I mean, it's emotional now to talk about, but it's like, okay, we have planned for this. This is just one obstacle. There's nothing I can do about it. So control what you can control. And the other stuff that you can't control, try to put it aside for a little while. So there's a lot of mental things that you can do to kind of prepare. And you can try to predict as many of the problems before, but sometimes something pops up and it's like, I did not plan for that.
Yeah, no kidding. And especially something like that kind of news, right? And just kudos to yourself and your wife for persevering through that moment. Cause who would begrudge you for saying, at this time, timing's not right and I'm not going to move forward and I'll do it again at another time. But, and the resilience that you have as a couple to be able to, pursue that and go through it is just incredible. I just wanted to say kudos to you for that.
Well, and a big credit to my wife, because she said, there's nothing we can do about this, hon. The results, if we get them back on, today, or we get them back on, we're not going to know them until the race is done. So you might as well go do it. And I talked to my crew. I talked to my crew beforehand. And so at certain points you can have somebody that runs with you. And they kind of make sure that you're a little bit, mentally prepared to keep going. And so I told one of my crewmates, I said, here's what's going on. I said, we don't know what's happening with my wife. And at any point I just may lose it. I just may start crying. I just may need something. And I have those list of things that when it gets bad, it's like, okay, I can do this. So there are those things that I know, here's what I need. Let me get those things. And that'll help me moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. Right on. So one of the things you kind of touched on a few things here, but I was wondering, again, as we dive into a little bit more about the mindset, and then I want to get into your book, but obviously there's opportunities here where you had already faced where, really the chips are down for you, and you may be struggling with wanting to move forward. So how did you keep going? What were some techniques that you used? How were you able to keep yourself going?
Yeah. There's a number of things. I mean, one of it is kind of look at what you have control of. It's like, okay, I had no control of that situation, or, probably about 50 hours in, and I hadn't slept at this point. It started to rain. It was the middle of the night. It started to rain. I have no control of the rain. What I have control of is whether I just kind of turn sour or, you know, and I just kind of grumble about it, or it's like I can put on, you know, I have an emergency rain jacket, a light jacket, I can put it on and I can keep moving forward. So there's nothing I can do about that. It's being able to look at, what do I need right now in order to keep me moving forward? You know, at one point I remember, so, you know, in California, unfortunately, one of the seasons we're now starting to have is a smoke season, because we have wildfires that are going on all the time. And there's one right now burning in Yosemite, which is one of the, you know, pristine national parks in the area.
Yeah.
And at the time, that summer I did this race, there was a fire that was not far from the Tahoe area, and it was there was a lot of smoke in the air. And I had the trails are really dusty. So you're breathing in, you know, that dust a lot, and then the smoke. And so you lose your voice. And I remember, you know, halfway through, well, probably about 125 miles in, my voice was totally gone. And all I needed, or all I wanted, was some throat lozenges. And so I told the guy that was pacing with me, I said, call the crew, tell them at the next aid station, I need throat lozenges. And so that's what I need in order to get through it. You know, the other thing is knowing what are those things that will pick you up, you know. So 70 miles in, when I just started crying, thinking about my wife, you know, it's like one of the things that picks me up is if I listen to music. And I have a playlist that I only listen to. It's my favorite songs. I only listen to it when it's really bad. And I call it Run Bad. So I will play that list, and it's when I play it, things aren't well. And it's like, okay, that picks me up. Yeah. You know, and then kind of one other things is, you know, focus on why are we doing this? You know, what is the why? What's the reason? So, you know, part of it is focus on what do I need now? But then the other thing is focusing on the why. What is it, the bigger reason? So focus on the big picture of, you know, here's why I'm doing this. So there's just a number of things that I will use to okay, what do I need now? Well, you know, how's this going to keep getting me through it? And by going through the training, hopefully you've experienced these lows. So when you experience them on race day, it's like, okay, yeah, I've experienced something like this. I know I can get through it. You know, you know, one last story. I remember I was training and I had to do 4 long runs in a row over days. So I had to do Sunday, I had to run 30 miles. Monday, I had to run 30 miles, Tuesday, 30 miles, and Wednesday, 30 miles. So 4 days in a row. And on the third day, you know, I was 10 miles into it. It was hot. I was tired. I was whining. I was complaining to myself. And this was just a training day. It was probably 90 degrees out. And I thought, you know, I'm having a bad day. And then I thought about a friend of mine who was diagnosed with cancer, going through cancer. And I thought, you know, any pain that I'm dealing with is temporary and hers isn't. Yeah. So I really don't have, she's going through a lot more, and she's owning it, and she's surviving. It's like, I have nothing to worry about. You know, I could suck it up and keep moving.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Especially when you have that as a comparison. And what I really like what you're saying, and the message and that I'm getting from you is that you're really about trying to stay in the moment. Yeah. And be as present as possible, because that is the only thing we can control, is what's right in front of us. And I think how many of us, and it's why we get, you know, I talked about in the intro about this fear piece that comes up, because I think we as humans, we're just naturally inclined to awfulize the thing that we're trying to go after, right? It's like, oh, all these bad things are going to happen. And that's all that we can think about. And we don't realize, well, what's the one thing I do have control of? And it's right in front of me. Like you said, something as simple as I just need some throat lozenges. That's all I need. Yeah. And you can take that put your next foot forward, and we're just get lost in, you know, in space almost, of being so fearful.
I mean, it's a great point, Alan. And when for the book, I interviewed 100 people, 100 executives and ultra distance endurance athletes. And I was talking, about this subject with somebody, and this guy, he was a founder of a company. He ended up selling it for $4 billion. And so he's I worked for the company. I worked for him. He was phenomenal, and he deserves everything he's gotten. And so he's also this really amazing expert skier, and he travels all over the world skiing. And I also talked to his ski instructor, who is a kind of a high level professional ski coach. And so we were talking about that risk, that fear factor. And I said, how do you guys handle it? And they said, he goes, we often think of the worst case scenario, and imagine you're sitting on top of a cornice and you're looking down, and what we think about it is, okay, I'm going to die. I'm going to fall. I'm going to go off the cliff. I'm going to hit a rock and I'm going to die. So we're really good at thinking about the worst case scenario. And he goes, what I like to think is, what's the realistic worst case scenario? Because a lot of things have to go wrong for the worst case scenario. It's not one thing. It's a multiple number of things that have to go wrong for that worst case scenario to hit.
Yeah, no kidding. And a great segue into your book. So I was getting a chance to just browse through it there, and I love the title, Epic Performance Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And so I wanted to really dive into and find out, like, what did you learn from these folks? Like, what are they doing really well that the average guy or the average gal isn't doing?
Yeah. So the epic performance, kind of where that came from, those are 5 pillars. So the E in epic, stands for envision. How do you envision the big things in life and at work that you want to accomplish? P is, how do you put a plan in place in order to accomplish those things? I is, how do you iterate toward accomplishing them? So you don't start off running 200 miles. My first, I remember going out when I started training, and I did a 4-mile run, and I came back and my legs were really sore. So you start off a much shorter run and then you build up to it. So that's what iterate is. C is, how do you collaborate with other people? Somebody's done something like this before. When you started your podcast, my guess is you probably talked to other people that had done podcasts.
100%.
Why recreate? Somebody has been successful or failed at it, and let's learn from them. So that's the collaborate. And the last is, you have to go out and perform it. So that's the epic performance. And what I learned from kind of these 100 people is, nobody's great at all 5. And so they're probably good at maybe 2 or 3. So I tried to take, the best of the different elements of, the people that are good at envisioners, the people that are good planners, and be able to bring those in. And so, with all types of training is, we often think, what am I bad at? Let me focus on that. And there's another view of, what am I really good at? And let me get a little bit incremental. Let me get incrementally better at that. You look at Usain Bolt, who is the fastest man on the planet, for running. Yeah. He doesn't work on his rowing. He doesn't work on the high jump. He works on getting incrementally, a thousandth of a second faster.
Yeah.
And so you got to have kind of a baseline where you got to be able to do certain things, but how do you leverage the experience of others to compensate where you may not be strong? And then how do you get really good at some of those 2 or 3 things that you need to be good at?
Yeah, I totally agree with that philosophy of, working on our strengths as opposed to working on our weaknesses. And I can't remember where that quote came from, but somebody had said, working on our weaknesses only makes them a little bit better. Right. It make us more rounded, right? It just makes them a little bit better, because it's, in the end, it's still a weakness. Yeah. And so focusing on the thing that we're good at, or the thing that, that we excel at, really makes a lot of sense to me. Now, so you had opportunity to write this book, but how did you, what inspired you to do this? And so you said you worked with the one gentleman, and, with somebody that you worked with. So there's one interview, but how did you get inspired to find 99 more guys and gals to talk about, peak performance?
So you go back to that 300-mile bike ride, and, and I'm 275 miles in, and I start kind of having this epiphany that, maybe the limit is further out. Because I thought the 300 miles, I thought, okay, I might see the limit of what I can do. And when I realized, I haven't seen the limit, I thought, okay, there's something here. And I remember when I was 20 writing kind of a list of goals of things I wanted to accomplish. And one of them was write a book. But you got to have something to say. Or I wanted to make sure I had something to say. I guess you don't have to have something to say if you're going to write a book, but I wanted to make sure I did. And so, that bike ride started getting me thinking. And then, my wife and I, we've taken 2 long kind of, sabbaticals, I should say, and traveled around the world. Once when it was just the 2 of us, we did 7 months and traveled the world. And then we did it a couple of years ago with our, at the time, 9 and 11-year-old boys. We spent a year. And before we were getting to leave, I had a number of people came up to us and I remember we were at a going away party and they said, I could never do that. Meaning that they could never go, travel around the world for a year. And I thought, God, that is so, is it you could never do it or you don't want to do it? And there's a big distinction. And I think sometimes we say, I can't do it. It's like, there's a lot of excuses we can use. So between the 200-mile run, the bike ride, I started to think, okay, there's a book here. How do you push yourself further to your limits? And I knew what I did, but I wanted to learn from other people. And I just kind of put let me talk to 100 people. I'd like to tell you, Alan, that there was this great scientific, and a lot of thought putting into, how I got to 100. And it's like, I want to talk to 100. And so I looked at my database, and about 60% of them I had known or somehow was easily connected to. And then the other 40%, every time I would have an interview, I would say, hey, who should I talk to? And they would connect me up. And so I thought, all right, how many people am I going to have to ask before I can get 100? And the answer is 102. Only 2 people said no to me, which blew me out of the water as well. I mean, that was a big learning thing. And,
Sure.
and so I just loved doing the interviews. I mean, I learned so much. And, that's what I talk about. I bring out their experiences and my experiences in the book.
Yeah. And that's what I really like about the book is that you have all these different, there's so many grains of truth that resonates with all the stories, but they're coming from different perspectives. And I think that's what's so powerful about what you did there. So what surprised you most about these interviews with these individuals, and whether they were an executive or an endurance athlete, what surprised you the most in your interview process?
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 things come to mind really easily. One is how easy it was to ask and then hear yes from these people. And it reinforced something, I've always been hesitant at times to kind of ask because I didn't want to hear no. And after doing this, and I knew this intellectually, Alan, but it really reinforced if you don't ask, the answer is no. If you ask, the answer just may be yes. But you have to be prepared for the no. And so that's what, I mean, that was one big thing. It's like, okay, I asked and people loved, doing it. And the other thing that surprised me is, I'd reach out and on the executive side, these were people that were CIOs, CEOs, kind of the top of their function or founders of companies. And then on the ultra distance side, so about 75% of the people were executives, and then 25% were on the ultra distance athletes. So they had done an Ironman kind of, or the equivalent. They had run 100 miles or the equivalent of doing that. And I talked to 2 people who did 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. And what surprised me is I would reach out to these people and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. I'd love to interview you. And so many of them would say, well, why do you want to interview me? I mean, I haven't done anything. And so that humbleness of them. And then I would say, well, you just ran 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. Most people don't do that. It's a pretty big thing. And okay. And how giving they were their time. And so it's, that I just loved doing that.
Absolutely. Isn't that interesting about even for peak performers that they still have that sense of humility, that like, who am I? Why are you want to interview me? What do I bring to the table? Because for them and for all of us, right, we live in our own little world and we can't see the greatness that's within us. And yet we have so much greatness. And so I think that's why the work you're doing with the book and, with the summiting group, I think it's just so critical for today.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to touch on also about, you talk about how that it's good for us to be nervous, right? It's the nervousness is okay. And I agree with that, but I want to get your take on why you feel that being nervous is good.
It's hard to know, when are you pushing yourself? When are you going outside that zone or kind of pushing yourself? And I think that barometer of being nervous is one way it tells you if you're going outside that comfort zone. So, if I remember I was working, so I facilitate executive retreats, and I work with teams to kind of put their strategic plan together, what their next couple of years are. And I remember I was working with a team recently, and they put some ideas on the wall, and I turned around and I looked at it and I said, "Hey, does this make you nervous? Kind of what you got up here?" And most of them, in a sense, said no. And I said, maybe we got to go a little bit bigger, because that shows that you're pushing yourself further. And when you push yourself, you can probably go a little bit further, but it also gets you outside that comfort zone. And so that's why it's always been a good barometer for me. It's kind of, what's that nervous quotient? And so I remember when my wife and I were trying to decide if we were going to go travel around the world with the kids. It's like, you're taking the kids out of school for a year. We're now in charge of teaching them, and we're going to be, spend a lot of time in, developing world. It's not going to be comfortable. And it's like, I'm nervous about this. And it's like, okay, then it's probably the right thing to do.
Absolutely. And just think of the life lessons and everything else over and above a curriculum that your children have now had an opportunity to experience, and how much that has shaped, their world and what their lives are going to be like. I think that's phenomenal. Commend you for doing that. Listen, so of everything that we've talked about today, and maybe something that we haven't yet touched on, what would be one takeaway that we'd want our listeners to remember?
It's, we're on this earth for a finite number of years, and depending on kind of where you stand spiritually, it may last longer. But we know you're on the earth for, on average 70 to 80 years. And how do you spend that time and so I never, and I shouldn't say never, I don't want to get to the point where I'm kind of at the end of that time. And let's say I'm in the 80s or so, and, oh God, I regret not taking that trip for a year with my family. There's a woman who wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. She's from the UK. And she was a nurse, and she would work with people kind of in their last year of life. And so she started to interview them and talk to them. And one of the things that she found was people regret the things they didn't do versus the things they did do. And so I remember, about 2-3 months ago, my wife and I, we had this opportunity to raise some money, go into Poland, and help with the Ukrainian situation with the refugees.
Right.
And originally we were going to go down to the border of Poland and Ukraine, but it was just like, we watch what's going on in the news. It just kills me. It's like, what can we do? And so how do we do something? And we raised $60,000. We went down, we were able to get, do some pretty cool things. But before we decided to do it, we were both, I looked at my wife and she looked at me and she goes, if we don't do this, we're going to regret it.
Yeah.
And it was like, end of discussion. Okay, let's go do it. and we did it and took the kids. And so it's really understanding what are those things that, man, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it. And I was working with somebody the other day, and they were trying to decide if they take on this big project.
Yeah.
And they were really, I knew they wanted to. And that's the one question I said, in 20 years, are you going to regret not taking this project on? He goes, yeah, of course. I said, you got to do it.
Yeah.
It was that easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Man, that is so powerful. What a great way to wrap things up. I just want to say thank you, Bryan, for spending time with me today. And we got a chance to unpack quite a bit about what it means to live an epic life. So if someone wanted to get involved with your work or participate in your programs, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, go to epicperformances.com. So EPIC performances with an S.com. And, they can see, they'll be able to connect up with me. They can email me at brian@epicperformances.com or connect on LinkedIn. The book is up on Amazon, for pre-sale up until August 16th. And then it's live.
Right on. Well, I'll make sure all that information is in the show notes so people can reach out and get a hold of you. And I just want to say once again, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Alan. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.